Your destiny is reflecting in the chrome surfaces of the future, waiting for you to step forward and claim it. Join us for the stories of those who dare to take control and rewrite their own history. Click subscribe now and start building your own cinematic legacy today.
My mother used to introduce me at family gatherings the same way every single time. "This is my daughter, Sara. And this," she'd say, her whole face lighting up like someone had flipped a switch, "is my son, Daniel." The pause between those two sentences said everything her words didn't. I stopped correcting the way she said it when I was about 12 years old. By 26, I had stopped expecting anything different. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened at my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner last October. This isn't a story about bitterness. I spent a long time being bitter, and it didn't build anything worth keeping. This is a story about what happens when you put your head down, do the work, and let the truth find its own way into the room. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio. My father worked in hospital administration his whole career. Not glamorous, but stable and respectable, and he made sure everyone in his professional circle knew exactly how respectable it was. My mother taught piano lessons out of our living room until my brother was old enough for her to decide that her real job was managing his future. Daniel was 4 years younger than me, naturally charming in the way some people just are, and from the time he was in middle school, my parents had quietly decided that he was the one the family's hopes lived inside. I was not the forgotten child. I want to get that part right. They fed me, clothed me, paid for my college applications. What they gave me was technically everything. What they withheld was subtler and harder to name. It was the version of attention that carries belief inside it. When Daniel got a B+, my father frowned and said they'd work harder next semester. When I got straight A's, my mother nodded and said something like, "Good, keep it up," before turning back to whatever she was doing. When Daniel's high school baseball team made regionals, my parents drove 4 hours to watch. When I was accepted to the nursing program at Ohio State, which was genuinely competitive and something I had worked toward for 2 years, my father said, "Nursing is a solid choice for someone who isn't sure what they want." I was very sure what I wanted. I just understood, by then, that it didn't matter. I went to Ohio State. I became a nurse. I worked 3 years in the ICU at a large hospital in Columbus, which taught me more about human beings and their capacity to fight for life than anything else I have ever experienced. I also discovered, during those years, that I was deeply interested in the space where healthcare and operations intersect. The systems side of things, the reason a patient waits 3 hours when they should wait 40 minutes. The reason a ward runs out of supplies on a Tuesday and nobody catches it until Thursday. I started reading everything I could find. I took online courses on my days off. I talked to anyone who had talked to me about healthcare operations, clinical workflow, patient outcome data. My parents, when I mentioned any of this, said variations of the same thing. "You already have a stable job, Sara. Why complicate it?" Daniel, meanwhile, had become a pharmaceutical sales representative. It was a fine job. He was good at it. He has always been good at anything that requires charm and a firm handshake. My parents spoke about his career the way people speak about a moon landing. At every family dinner for 3 years, my father would find a way to mention what region Daniel was covering now, what his numbers looked like, how his district manager had singled him out. I sat through those dinners and ate my food and asked polite questions. I did not tell them what I was building on the side, partly because they hadn't asked, and partly because I had learned not to need their reaction to make something feel real. Here is what I was building. After 2 years of nights and weekends and one very expensive mistake with a software vendor I should have vetted more carefully, I had co-founded a small healthcare consulting firm with a woman named Dr. Renata Osei, whom I had met at a continuing education seminar and who had 15 years of clinical operations experience and the sharpest analytical mind I had ever encountered. Our firm helped mid-sized regional hospitals identify inefficiencies in patient flow, staffing allocation, and supply chain management. We were not a tech startup. We did not have venture capital. What we had was a genuine solution to a problem that every hospital administrator in the country recognized the moment we described it, and a track record that we built quietly, one client at a time. By the time my brother got engaged to a woman named Melissa, our firm had 12 full-time employees and contracts, with 9 hospital systems across 4 states. We were not famous. We were not the kind of company that shows up in magazine profiles. We were the kind of company that shows up in the footnotes of a hospital's annual report under operational improvements, and that suited me perfectly. Melissa was lovely. I mean that genuinely, and without any complicated feelings attached. She was warm and direct and laughed easily, and I could see immediately why my brother loved her. She worked in healthcare administration herself. She was a director of operations at a regional health system in Pennsylvania, which my parents mentioned approximately 0 times at any dinner I attended. Because healthcare administration was what I cared about, and it was still not the habit of my family to connect things I cared about to things worth discussing. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant in the suburb where my parents lived. Not a country club, not a ballroom, just a good Italian place that they had reserved the back room of. 26 people, immediate family and close friends of both sides. My mother had managed the seating, and I was placed at the far end of the second table, next to my father's cousin Gerald and his wife, who I had met perhaps 4 times in my life. It was a fine seat. I noticed where it was, recognized what it communicated, and decided to have the eggplant parmesan and let it go. My father gave a toast about Daniel that lasted 9 minutes. I timed it, not out of resentment, just because timing things is a habit I picked up from workflow analysis. He talked about Daniel's first Little League game. He talked about Daniel's college graduation. He talked about what it meant to watch a son become a man who knew how to show up for the people he loved. My mother was crying by the 4th minute. They were real tears, I don't doubt that. I just noticed that the toast my mother gave lasted 2 minutes, and was mostly about Melissa's kindness and what a wonderful daughter-in-law she would be. I was mentioned once, in a clause, and with Sara here to celebrate too. We really do have everything we could want tonight. I was present. That was my function. Dinner proceeded. I talked to Gerald's wife about her garden, which she was genuinely passionate about, and I found myself enjoying the conversation more than I expected. Melissa made her way around the room between courses, the way people do when they are gracious and want everyone to feel included. When she got to my end of the table, she hugged me and said she was glad I was there, and I believed her. Then she sat down in the empty chair next to me. Gerald had gotten up to find the restroom, and we started talking. She asked me how long I had been in Columbus, and I told her 6 years. She asked what I did, and I told her I worked in healthcare consulting. She tilted her head slightly. What kind of consulting? Patient flow? Staffing optimization? Supply chain? Mostly regional hospital systems. She went quiet for a second in the way people go quiet when something has just slid into a different category in their mind. What's the name of your firm? I told her. She put her fork down. Not dramatically. It was a quiet moment actually, private almost, except that my aunt was sitting close enough to notice, and my aunt notices everything. Melissa looked at me with an expression I can only describe as recalibrating. Clear Path Health Consulting? Yes. You work there? I co-founded it, with Dr. Renata Osei. Melissa was quiet for what felt like a long time but was probably 5 seconds. Then she said, and her voice was genuinely careful, like she was making sure she was understanding correctly. Your firm consulted for Allegheny West Regional last year. The patient flow restructure in their emergency and surgical intake. That was us. That was about 14 months ago. I know that project, she said. I know that project very well. She paused. We've been trying to hire the firm that did that work. Our VP of Operations has been trying to get a meeting with ClearPath for 2 months. She talks about that case study like it's. She stopped. You're the co-founder. I am. She looked at me for another moment. Then she looked down the table toward where my mother was laughing at something someone had said. And then she looked back at me. And her expression had shifted into something I didn't entirely know how to read. It wasn't pity. It was closer to the feeling you get when you realize a room is arranged differently than you thought. She said, "Does your family know what you've built?" I considered how to answer that honestly. "They know I have a consulting business." Melissa did not say anything else about it right then. She squeezed my hand, which surprised me, and went back to making her rounds. But my aunt had heard enough to start asking questions. And my aunt's voice carries. And within 10 minutes, the conversation at our end of the table had shifted in a direction I had not planned, and was not steering. My father came over during the dessert course to ask what everyone was talking about. My aunt, whose name is Diane, and who has always had a talent for delivering information in the tone of someone simply clarifying facts, told him that she had just been learning more about my company. My father laughed. My father left politely and said something vague about my consulting work. My aunt said with genuine pleasantness. Gerald looked it up. 12 employees, 9 hospital systems, and apparently Melissa's organization has been trying to get a meeting with Sarah's firm for 2 months. The way my father's expression moved through 3 different versions of itself in about 4 seconds is something I will not forget. He looked at me. I looked back at him. I did not smile in a way that meant anything other than being present. I had not planned any of this, and I want that to be understood. I had not come to my brother's rehearsal dinner with a strategy. I had come to eat dinner and be a decent sister, and then drive home. My mother came over. There was a short, quiet exchange between her and my father that I was not entirely part of. Then my mother sat down next to me, not at her seat, at a chair someone pulled over, and she said in a voice that was working very hard to sound normal, "Tell me more about what you've been doing, Sarah." I told her. Calmly, factually, without flourish, I told her about Renata and how we met. I told her about the first contract we signed, and what it took to deliver on it. I told her about the 12 people on our team, and why I was proud of each one of them. I told her about the Allegheny West project, which had reduced their surgical intake wait time by 31% in 8 months. My mother listened to all of it, and when I was done, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about that question for a beat before I answered, because it deserved an honest answer. "You never asked, Mom. In 6 years, you never once asked me what I was working on." She didn't argue with that. I think that was the most surprising part of the evening, actually. Not the look on my father's face, not Melissa's recognition, but my mother simply not arguing with the truth when it was placed in front of her. Daniel found me before I left. He'd gotten the summary version from Melissa, and he looked like a person doing rapid recalculation, which is an uncomfortable thing to watch someone you grew up with do. He hugged me in the parking lot and said he was sorry, in the specific way that means I know I have not been paying attention, not "I am sorry. Something bad happened to you." Those are different apologies and they require different responses. I told him I knew, and that I was glad he was happy and that I genuinely liked Melissa. All 3 of those things were true. I drove home on the highway with the windows down a little, even though it was cold, because I needed the air. I want to say something about what that night was and what it wasn't. It wasn't a victory. I didn't go home feeling like I'd won something. What I felt was closer to a particular kind of tiredness that comes after you've been holding something at a distance for a long time, and you finally let yourself put it down. My parents were not transformed. My mother's question, "Why didn't you tell us?" was genuine. But it also placed the responsibility in the wrong location, and I noticed that even as I answered it, there will be more work to do in that relationship if there is a relationship there worth building. But I am 31 years old. I have 12 people whose livelihoods connect to decisions I make. I have a business partner who challenges me every single day to be more precise, more rigorous, more honest about what the data is actually showing us. I have a real skill that took real years to develop, and I applied it to real problems, and I helped real patients get through an emergency intake line 31% faster, which meant that somewhere, a person who was scared and in pain waited less time before someone took care of them. Nobody at a rehearsal dinner gave me that. I built it while I was sitting at the far end of the table. Melissa emailed me 3 days after the dinner. Her VP of operations wanted to schedule a call the following week. I wrote back and said I would have my assistant send over our availability. I did not CC my parents. I did not need to. There is something I have come to understand about the way actions accumulate over time, and it has nothing to do with luck or timing or being in the right room. What happened at that rehearsal dinner was not a surprise delivered by the universe. It was the natural result of a very long chain of choices, mine and my family's both, finally becoming visible in the same moment. My parents made choices, year after year, about where to place their attention and their belief. Those choices shaped what my brother understood about his own value, and what I understood about the limits of waiting for someone else to assign mine. The irony is that their indifference gave me something I could not have manufactured on my own, the absolute clarity that if anything was going to be built, I was the one who had to build it. Not to prove something to them. Just because the work was real and it needed doing. That is what I mean when I say this is a story about cause and effect rather than revenge. Revenge requires the other person to be the center of the story. What I did at every stage, the night courses, the first bad vendor contract, the slow, careful work of earning a client's trust, none of that was about my parents. It was about the problem in front of me, and whether I had the rigor to solve it. When you spend enough years making decisions that have nothing to do with the people who underestimated you, something shifts. You stop needing the revelation to feel complete. The work already did that. Integrity, I've learned, is not what you perform when people are watching. It is the standard you hold yourself to in the years when nobody is paying attention. When you are taking an online operations course on a Tuesday night after a 12-hour ICU shift. When you are rewriting a proposal for the third time because the second version wasn't honest enough about the risks. When you are sitting at the far end of a table and choosing not to make your presence smaller just because someone arranged the seating that way. Those small decisions are not dramatic. They don't feel like courage in the moment. But they are the thing, accumulated, that eventually walks into a room and speaks for itself. What Sara did was not perform strength. She built it, quietly, in the specific way that strength actually gets built. Through discipline applied to something meaningful. Through honesty about what she didn't know yet. Through the decision to keep going when the people closest to her offered nothing that looked like belief. And here is the part that matters most. The part I keep returning to, her mother asked. Why didn't you tell us? And Sara's answer was the truest thing in the room that night. She didn't withhold her work as a strategy. She simply stopped offering it to people who had not learned how to receive it. That is not coldness. That is a form of self-respect that takes real intelligence to arrive at. The understanding that your growth does not require an audience, and that the people who missed it while it was happening will find their way to the truth eventually, with or without your help. You cannot control whether the people you love choose to see you clearly. You can only control the quality of what you do with your time while you are waiting to find out.